Fathers aren't supposed to be forgotten. They're supposed to be pillars, protectors, the quiet strength behind a child's smile. But when Daniel's wife, Marissa, decided to sever him from his daughter's life, she didn't use violence or distance. She used something far more destructive: lies. Marissa told their daughter, Emily, that her father had abandoned them, that he didn't want to see her, that every silence, every absence was his choice. Emily grew up believing her father was a selfish man who had walked away without looking back. Daniel didn't even know how much poison was being poured into his daughter's mind. All he knew was that every attempt he made to connect was blocked, letters returned, phone calls ignored, court visitation hearings delayed. For years he fought, bled money on lawyers, and begged for time with Emily. But Marissa always found a way to twist the truth. And so Emily grew up without him. On her birthdays, Marissa would sneer, "If your dad really cared, he'd be here." On holidays, she'd shake her head. "He's too busy with his new life." Emily swallowed every word. Daniel, meanwhile, never gave up hope. He wrote letters, hundreds of them. He sent gifts, cards, even simple sketches of the two of them together. Dreams of fishing trips, graduations, weddings he wanted to be there for. Most never reached her. Friends told him to move on. "She's poisoned against you," they said. "You'll only hurt yourself." But Daniel refused. He knew the day would come when Emily would learn the truth. He just didn't know when. That hope was the only thing that kept him alive. Emily turned 18. And one afternoon, while rummaging through the attic for old photo albums, she stumbled upon a dusty box. First she thought it was junk. But when she opened it, she froze. Inside were letters. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all addressed to her. Her father's handwriting on every envelope. Her hands shook as she opened the first one. "Happy 8th birthday, Emmy. I miss you more than words can say." Tears blurred her vision. Another letter. "I'll never stop fighting for you." Another. "Your mom won't let me see you, but I'll always love you." By the 10th letter, Emily's world cracked in half. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had been fighting for her all along. It was her mother who had lied. That night, Emily stormed downstairs, clutching a fistful of letters. "You told me Dad didn't care," she screamed. "You said he left us." Marissa paled. "Emily, you don't understand." "No." Emily's voice trembled with rage. "I hated him my whole life because of you. You made me believe he didn't love me. You stole my father from me." For the first time, Marissa didn't have a ready excuse. Her daughter's eyes, once trusting, once blind, now burned with betrayal. But this wasn't just about anger. For Emily, this was the start of something deeper, something colder, a lifetime of quiet payback. Emily reached out to Daniel. Their first meeting was awkward. Years of distance couldn't vanish overnight. But when she hugged him for the first time since she was a toddler, the dam broke. Both of them cried. He didn't blame her. He never could. "It wasn't your fault," he whispered. "I always loved you." From that day forward, Emily vowed she would make her mother face justice, not through shouting matches but through actions. Through living her life in a way that showed her mother exactly what she had lost. Emily didn't cut Marissa off immediately. That would have been too easy. Instead, she gave her just enough access to watch her slip away. She invited her father to milestones Marissa assumed she'd control. Her college graduation, her engagement, even her wedding. Each time, Daniel was by Emily's side, beaming with pride. And each time, Marissa sat in the back, invisible, her lies rotting inside her. When Emily gave her wedding toast, she raised a glass, not to her mother who had sacrificed everything, but to her father who had fought against all odds to love me. The applause was thunderous. Marissa's face went white. That moment wasn't just revenge. It was exposure. Everyone finally saw who the real villain was. Years later, when Daniel became a grandfather, Marissa wasn't even told until after the baby was born. "You'll meet my child when you tell the truth," Emily told her coldly. Marissa never did. She grew old, bitter, isolated. Her reputation destroyed by the truth Emily revealed piece by piece over the years. Family members cut ties, friends turned away, and her lies no longer shielded her. Daniel, meanwhile, flourished. He finally had what had been stolen from him: love, family, and a daughter who had chosen to stand by him. And for Emily, that was the lifetime payback. Not loud, not violent, but permanent. A justice her mother would feel until her final breath. The night Emily first reconnected with Daniel, she felt like she was meeting a stranger, and her own blood at the same time. She walked into the small diner where he had suggested they meet. He stood before her, a man in his late 40s, weathered but dignified. His eyes were tired from years of fighting shadows, but when he saw her, they lit up in a way that broke her heart. "Emmy!" His voice cracked. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. And then, without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms. It wasn't a hug that erased the years, but it was a hug that promised new ones. Tears streamed down both their faces as the weight of lost time pressed down on them. "I wrote to you every birthday," he whispered. "I know," she said. "I found them." Over plates of untouched pancakes and coffee gone cold, Daniel shared his side. He explained the endless court battles. How he had drained his savings on lawyers who never won against Marissa's manipulations. How judges, swayed by her carefully spun lies, often ruled in her favor. How every attempt to show up at Emily's school or games ended with Marissa calling security, labeling him unstable. "I didn't stop because I didn't care," Daniel said. His hands trembled as he clutched the coffee mug. "I stopped because I didn't want you growing up thinking your dad was a criminal. She painted me as a monster. I thought maybe you'd find out the truth one day on your own." Emily's stomach twisted. For years she had seen him as the villain, when all along, he had been the victim. "Dad," she said softly, tears welling again. "She stole you from me." That night, Emily made her choice. She didn't want just a reunion. She wanted justice. And her version of justice wasn't about shouting at her mother or trying to ruin her life overnight. No, Emily understood something Marissa never would. Revenge isn't always about fire. Sometimes it's about ice. Cold, patient, unrelenting. Her payback would be stretched across years. And it would cut deeper than any quick strike ever could. The first real test came at Emily's college graduation. Marissa assumed, as always, that the spotlight belonged to her. She bragged to relatives about being a single mom who sacrificed everything. She even ordered a custom sash for Emily that read, "Mom's Pride." But Emily had other plans. When her name was called and she stepped onto the stage, she carried a bouquet. Not for her mother but for her father, who was sitting quietly in the audience. Cameras flashed as she walked straight past Marissa and placed the flowers into Daniel's hands. "Thank you, Dad," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "For never giving up on me." The applause that followed wasn't just for her diploma. It was for the truth. Marissa's face turned red, her smile stiff, her fingers clutching her seat so tightly her knuckles whitened. She couldn't say a word. Not without exposing herself. Years later, when Emily got engaged, Marissa expected to be the star again. She began telling neighbors how she would walk Emily down the aisle since the father was absent. But on the wedding day, when the doors opened and the music swelled, it wasn't Marissa who took Emily's arm. It was Daniel. Gasps rippled through the guests. The man everyone had been told was a deadbeat stood proudly beside his daughter, tears streaming freely as he walked her toward a new life. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this bride away?" Emily turned to her father and said, "The man who never stopped fighting for me." Every head turned toward Marissa, whose face was pale as stone. Whispers spread like wildfire. For years she had controlled the narrative, but now, in one sentence, it was shattered. At the reception, Emily gave a toast. She could have thanked her mother for raising her alone. She could have played the role Marissa demanded. But instead, she raised her glass and said, "I want to thank the parent who showed me the true meaning of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. The one who was painted as a villain but proved to be the hero. Dad, this one's for you." The room erupted in applause. Kiss cheered. Daniel cried silently, humbled but vindicated. And Marissa? She excused herself to the restroom and didn't return for almost an hour. When she did, her eyes were red, her makeup smeared. She had been crying not for Emily, but for the control she had finally lost. Word spread quickly among relatives and friends. They began to piece together the truth. Daniel had never abandoned Emily. He had been pushed out by Marissa's lies. Old friends stopped calling Marissa. Family members distanced themselves. Even her co-workers, who once admired her as a single mother warrior, began to question her stories. For the first time she was alone. Not physically but socially. And Marissa thrived on reputation. Losing it was worse than any punishment Emily could have planned. Years later, Emily had her first child. Marissa assumed she would be the first to hold the baby, just as she had always claimed her rights as a mother. But when she showed up at the hospital uninvited, Emily stopped her at the door. "You'll meet my child," Emily said coldly, "when you admit the truth, when you stop lying about Dad." Marissa stammered, her face twitching. "Emily, I did what I had to do." "No," Emily interrupted. "You did what you wanted. And now, you'll live with what you've lost." Daniel, meanwhile, was inside the room, cradling his grandchild with tears streaming down his face. Marissa watched through the glass window, powerless. Emily's revenge wasn't violent. It wasn't explosive. It was silent, stretched over years, cutting piece by piece until her mother's lies crumbled around her. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because the real downfall was still ahead. Marissa's final reckoning, when karma would come knocking in a way she never expected. After the wedding humiliation and the cold rejection at the hospital, Marissa's carefully built facade began to collapse. Neighbors who once admired her for being a resilient single mom now whispered behind her back. Friends who had rallied to her side during custody battles slowly drifted away, sensing they had been manipulated. The truth was seeping out, like water through cracks in a dam. And Marissa knew it. She tried damage control. She called distant relatives, insisting Emily had been brainwashed by Daniel. She claimed Daniel was buying her affection with money. But no one believed her anymore. Not after seeing Daniel at the wedding, giving his daughter away with raw, undeniable emotion. Reputation was Marissa's currency. And now she was bankrupt. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was transforming. After years of silence and shame, he was finally embraced as the father he had always wanted to be. Emily invited him to family dinners, introduced him proudly as Dad to her friends, and leaned on him for guidance in ways she never could before. One evening, Emily brought him a small photo album she had been making. It held pictures of her wedding, her graduation, and moments from her life that he had missed, but with one difference. In each photo, she had digitally inserted Daniel. At her prom, at her school recital, at her first soccer game. When Daniel flipped through the pages, tears blurred his vision. "Why would you do this, Emmy?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Because these are the memories we should have had," Emily said softly. "And from now on, I won't let anyone take them from us again." Daniel hugged her tightly. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own daughter's life. Marissa's anger festered. She had always thrived on control, on being the hero in every story she told. But now she was the villain, and everyone knew it. She began showing up at Emily's house unannounced, banging on the door and demanding to be let in. One night, when Daniel answered the door, Marissa's fury boiled over. "You poisoned her against me," she screamed, her face twisted with rage. Daniel stayed calm. "No, Marissa. You did that yourself." Emily stepped into the doorway, her child in her arms. Her voice was steady. "If you can't admit the truth, you don't belong here." Marissa's eyes darted between them. Her ex-husband holding firm, her daughter standing against her, and her grandchild, who didn't even know her name. For the first time, she realized she had truly lost everything she thought she owned. The social isolation was only the beginning. Karma had more in store. Marissa had spent years living beyond her means. She loved flaunting luxury handbags, spa treatments, and vacations, always claiming she deserved it after all she'd sacrificed. But without the support of friends and relatives she once leaned on financially, her debts began piling up. Credit cards maxed out. Mortgage overdue. One by one, her assets slipped away. Emily heard about it through the grapevine. She wasn't surprised. Greed and lies always end the same way, empty. "Should we help her?" Daniel asked cautiously one evening. Emily shook her head. "Dad, she chose this path. If we save her now, she'll just twist it into another story where she's the victim and we're the villains." Daniel sighed. He hated watching anyone suffer, even the woman who had stolen his daughter from him. But he trusted Emily's judgment. The final blow came at a family reunion. It was the first time in years that both sides of the extended family were gathered. Marissa showed up, uninvited, hoping to rebuild her reputation. But Emily was ready. She had brought the box of letters Daniel had written her. Every birthday card, every holiday note, every proof of his love that Marissa had hidden. When relatives gathered around, Emily pulled out the box and placed it on the table. "These are letters from my father. 4 years I never saw them because Mom kept them from me." The room went silent. Relatives who had once believed Marissa's stories now stared at her in disgust. Daniel spoke softly but firmly. "I fought for my daughter every day. But Marissa made sure she grew up thinking I was the enemy. These letters are the truth she tried to bury." Marissa's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time in her life she had no script. The whispers started. Aunts, uncles, cousins, they all turned their backs on her. One even said, "You robbed a child of her father. That's unforgivable." Marissa excused herself, but everyone knew she was running away. She would never regain the trust she had lost. Later that night, Daniel and Emily sat under the stars, reflecting on everything. "You didn't just take your life back," Daniel said quietly. "You gave me mine too." Emily smiled. "This was never about revenge for me, Dad. It was about justice. About making sure the truth was finally seen." Daniel nodded. For the first time in decades he felt peace. Over the years, Marissa faded further into the shadows. She lived in a small apartment, cut off from the family she had once ruled with lies. Her calls went unanswered. Her invitations ignored. Emily never spoke to her again. Not because she hated her, but because the most powerful punishment wasn't anger. It was absence. Marissa had built her entire life around control, attention, and lies. And Emily's silence stripped her of all three. Daniel, meanwhile, thrived. He became a grandfather who was present at every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. The family photos on the wall told a story of love, healing, and truth. He wasn't just a man who had survived betrayal. He was the father who won, because his daughter chose him in the end. And for Emily, that was the ultimate lifetime payback for her mother's lies. Marissa had always lived for control. Even as her reputation crumbled, her finances collapsed, and her family turned away, she still clung to the belief that she could manipulate her way back into Emily's life. She called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between pleading and raging. "Emily, I'm your mother, you can't erase me. Daniel will leave you again, just wait. He's always been a failure. Don't punish me forever, I only wanted to protect you." Emily never responded. Every ignored call was a dagger to Marissa's pride. Silence was not just punishment, it was exile. While Marissa spiraled, Daniel quietly flourished. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't flashy, but he was present. He came to every school play his grandchildren performed in, helped Emily's husband with home projects, and spent Sunday afternoons teaching Emily's kids how to ride their bikes. One day, after watching her father help her son wobble down the street on two wheels, Emily whispered to herself, "This is the life she stole from me. And now she has nothing." It wasn't gloating. It was clarity. Daniel had been denied years with his daughter, but he was gaining years with his grandchildren. That, Emily knew, was the sweetest revenge of all. The once lively house Marissa lived in became eerily quiet. The laughter of friends, the hum of phone calls, the admiration of neighbors, all gone. When she walked down the street, people avoided her eyes. At the grocery store, whispers followed her down the aisles. Even old co-workers looked at her with suspicion. She had become a ghost in her own community, known only for the lie that had robbed a daughter of her father. And though Marissa tried to deny it, loneliness gnawed at her. She missed birthdays, holidays. She missed holding her granddaughter, whom she had never been allowed to meet. Her punishment was not a single moment of disgrace. It was a lifetime of absence, stretched out before her. One spring, Emily received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky, almost unfamiliar. It was from Marissa. "My dearest Emily, I know I made mistakes. I know I lied. But I did it because I thought it was best. I was afraid your father would disappoint you. I see now that I was wrong. Please, before it's too late, let me be part of your life again. Let me see my grandchildren. Don't erase me completely. Love, Mom." Emily read it twice, her emotions torn. She showed it to Daniel, who sat silently for a long time. Finally he said, "It's your choice. But remember, regret is not the same as accountability." Emily nodded. She tucked the letter into a drawer and never replied. Not long after, news spread that Marissa had been diagnosed with a chronic illness. It wasn't immediately fatal, but it drained her energy, left her in pain, and made her dependent on others. The woman who once bragged about independence now struggled to walk up her own stairs. The woman who had thrived on attention now had no one to call. She tried again to reach Emily, this time using sympathy. "I'm sick, Emily. Don't you want your children to know their grandmother before it's too late?" But Emily's heart had hardened. She thought of the birthdays Daniel had missed, the letters she had never received, the lies that had shaped her entire childhood. "No," Emily said to herself, placing her phone face down. You don't get to use illness as your excuse. Not now. By now, Marissa's lies were well known. At church gatherings, people whispered about how she had stolen a father from his child. At family reunions, she wasn't invited at all. Daniel, on the other hand, had gained quiet respect. People admired his resilience, his patience, his dignity through years of betrayal. Some even apologized for believing Marissa's lies. One neighbor who had once sided with Marissa said to Emily, "Your father's the kind of man who deserves a statue in this town. I can't believe what your mother did to him." Emily smiled. Justice isn't always loud, she thought. Sometimes it's the quiet shift of truth that lasts forever. Years later, when Emily's eldest child was about to graduate high school, Marissa made one final attempt. She showed up at the ceremony, frail and thin, leaning on a cane. She spotted Emily and Daniel in the crowd, surrounded by family, glowing with pride. Slowly, Marissa made her way toward them. Her voice cracked as she called out, "Emily, please. I just want to say congratulations." The crowd parted slightly, watching the spectacle. Emily turned, her face calm, her children at her side. Daniel stood tall, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Marissa's eyes filled with tears. "Please, just one chance." Emily's voice was steady, firm, and final. "You had a lifetime of chances, Mom. You took them all away from us. And now, this moment, this family, this life, it doesn't belong to you." With that, Emily turned back to her father and children, leaving Marissa standing alone in the crowd. Marissa faded after that. She never recovered socially, emotionally, or physically. When she passed away quietly in her sleep a few years later, only a handful of people attended her funeral. Emily did not go. Daniel did not go. Instead, they spent the day together. Emily, her father, her husband, and her children. They shared stories, laughed, and took photos that would one day fill another album. For Emily, that was her mother's final punishment. Not anger, not hatred, but absence. Her lies had stolen the past, but they could never steal the future. Years later, as Daniel grew older, Emily's children adored him. They called him Grandpa with pride, never once questioning why he had been absent in their mother's early years. Emily often thought about her childhood, about the years of lies and pain. But then she'd look at her father sitting in a rocking chair, a grandchild in his lap, and smile. Her mother's lies had built walls. But Emily's payback had torn them down, brick by brick. And the man standing proud in the middle of it all, the man who had been painted as a villain, was finally seen as the hero he always was. Years passed, and Daniel's once quiet life transformed into something he had never dared to dream of. His home was no longer a place of silence but of laughter, chatter, and the chaos of grandchildren running through the hallways. On weekends, Emily's family would visit, filling the house with the smell of cooking, the sound of board games, and the kind of warmth Daniel thought he'd lost forever. Sometimes he would sit back in his old chair, smiling quietly to himself. He had missed the first half of Emily's life, stolen from him by Marissa's lies. But now, in this second half, he was making up for it with every hug, every bedtime story, every proud moment. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could replace the years gone. But this was peace. Emily often thought back to the box of letters she had discovered. She had considered burning them once, as a way of leaving the past behind. But instead she kept them safe, tucked away in a drawer. Not as reminders of pain, but as reminders of truth. Sometimes when she felt doubt creep in, she would reread those words. Her father's love, pouring out through every birthday message, every drawing, every holiday card. proof that even when she believed she was abandoned, she never truly was. She had grown up under her mother's lies. But she was raising her children under her father's truth. That, she realized, was the ultimate victory. The day Marissa passed away, the news came not with shock but with silence. There was no dramatic end, no sudden twist. Just a lonely woman in a small apartment, gone without fanfare. The funeral was sparsely attended. A few neighbors came out of respect, but no family stood at her graveside. Her lies had built her life, and her lies had buried her. Emily didn't go. Neither did Daniel. Instead, they went to the park that day with Emily's children. They had a picnic, fed the ducks, and took photos. Later, Emily whispered to her father, "This is what she missed. This is what her lies cost her." Daniel squeezed her hand. "And this is what we'll never lose again." As Daniel grew older, his health began to decline. But unlike Marissa, he was never alone. Emily was there, her children by her side, her husband helping in every way. One evening, when Daniel was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Emily asked him, "Do you regret anything, Dad?" Daniel sighed. "I regret the years I lost with you. But I don't regret the fight. Even when I couldn't reach you, I never stopped loving you. That's what kept me going." Emily smiled, tears filling her eyes. "And now you'll never be forgotten. Your love will live on in me, in my kids, in everything we do." Daniel nodded, his heart finally at peace. Emily often shared her story with her children, not to make them hate their grandmother, but to teach them about the power of truth. She told them, "Never let lies define your life. Never let anyone steal your story. And always, always fight for love, even when it seems impossible." Her children listened wide, understanding even at their young age that their family's story was one of pain, but also of triumph. Through them, Daniel's legacy wasn't just preserved, it was amplified. When Daniel eventually passed away, his funeral was nothing like Marissa's. The church was packed with friends, neighbors, relatives, and family. Emily stood at the front, holding her children's hands, her voice steady as she gave the eulogy. "My father was called many things in his life: failure, liar, an absent man. But the truth is, he was the strongest person I've ever known. He fought for me when no one believed him. He loved me when I thought I wasn't loved. And he proved that justice, though delayed, always comes." The audience rose in applause, not just for Daniel, but for the truth finally restored. Emily's children cried not because they felt cheated, but because they felt grateful, for the years they did have, for the love they had received. And Emily knew, as she placed a hand on her father's casket, that he had won. Not just against Marissa, not just against lies, but against the silence of being forgotten. Years later, when Emily was older, she would sit with her own grandchildren and tell them about her father. She never sugar-coated the truth. She told them about the lies, the betrayal, the years of absence. But she also told them about his patience, his resilience, his quiet dignity. "My father wasn't perfect," she'd say, "but he was the bravest man I knew. He fought for me even when I couldn't see it. And in the end, he showed me that truth always wins." Her grandchildren would ask, "What about your mother?" Emily would pause. Then she'd shake her head. "She taught me a lesson too, that lies may last for a while, but love lasts forever." Emily's revenge had never been about screaming matches or public fights. It had been about reclaiming her life. About giving her father the recognition he had been denied. About building a family rooted in truth, not lies. Her mother's lies had stolen the past. But Emily's lifetime payback was building a future her mother could never touch. And as she looked at her children and grandchildren gathered around her, Emily knew the truth had not just set her free. It had set her entire family free. And that was the lifetime payback of a daughter who turned her mother's lies into justice. If this story gripped your heart, imagine how many more untold betrayals are waiting to unfold. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because here at Revenge Hub, every betrayal meets its reckoning, and every lie has its price.